this new analysis of labor market data that shows the number of NEET young people reporting a mental health problem has increased from 11% in 2011 to 30% in 2022. Do you think that businesses should be developing strategies to support young people who are entering the job market and identifying with a mental health condition?
Great question, of course, incredibly relevant. Obviously, I'm no expert in this field, but I'll give my thoughts from a personal perspective. I think working in youth recruitment for the last few years, obviously I didn't know those exact figures that you just shared with me, but it doesn't surprise me. I think this is a population of people who might be moving cities, countries, sitting in their first face-to-face role in an office, daunted by like lots of new experiences, especially those people who did finish their education in a virtual environment. So certainly we do. Before I answer it, I suppose I'm a bit half full glass kind of guy in many respects. I would look at it and go, the talent I've worked with post-pandemic, I've seen such a noticeable difference. I think in the past, I've seen interns and grads sit on problems and not share problems and feel like they cannot share something with their manager, maybe because they feel as if that will go against their chance of getting a permanent role or a position in the graduate program. And they sit there and these problems kind of escalate. Whereas now, I fast forward 2023, I have the luxury of working with these fantastic individuals. The talent I speak to, they're open, they are afraid to show and trust you with their vulnerabilities. If their workload's too much, they're more likely to raise it. So I think those numbers can go either way. Maybe it's even the transparency of some managers, some senior leaders, businesses leading with this authenticity, encouraging people to forget about perfectionism. I needed to do it myself. I was always too keen to be a perfectionist. Maybe it's the fact that business committing to mental health and well-being are all kind of raising these numbers too, to be more aware. But yeah, of course, we do need to look at it in terms of the transfer to virtual environments. I think one way I always describe this is just that if I knew one of my team were having a bad day, I probably could find that out from looking across the desk or as they grabbed a coffee or if they disappeared. Those opportunities are less frequent to kind of tell someone's having a really bad day. So many kind of young talents I'm speaking to, they are worried about the potential impact on their career, their pay, the progression of AI and kind of the transition post-pandemic. I think personally, again, speaking, one thing I found really helpful for my clients in the intern space was that we create a wellbeing and engagement manager, which was fantastic. It gave us this new outlet, somebody that was detached from the normal HR, hiring manager, decision maker role. Somebody I brought in, maybe they were there as a kind of middle ground, I suppose, between both parties. The intern could speak to them about themselves, their personal circumstances, with no concern of a link to performance management, etc. They would run well-being events, they would have a virtual open door, etc. It was just about opening these opportunities to allow people to speak. Right. And we got some kind of really, really great feedback off it. Just to answer your question, kind of close it down, I appreciate that was quite a long first part of it, but I would say, yes, we need to drive this kind of working environment in a changing world. I think we were never, well, I personally was an office person 5 days a week. During the pandemic, all of a sudden I became a virtual manager where I managed my team majority of the days from home. We are all brand new to this, so I'm appreciative of the fact it's not easy and we're getting there. The steer I would take from the last 2-3 years of managing early careers or colleagues in general would be just to be real, kind of vulnerable and transparent. Leaders who encourage their team to be like that are more likely to share their honest appraisals themselves. Share the healthy models, not always healthy here, but when I am, I will share it. I think if I'm having a walk on lunch or taking a call whilst I'm out walking, for example, practice self-care, obviously is going to be something which is going to help them. Things like holiday management. I used to be really bad for sending emails late at night to my team who come in the next day at 9 a.m. and have this barrage of emails because I like to work in the evenings. Instead, I use a simple delay timer just to make them a little bit more comfortable and feel like they're not getting bombarded overnight every day. And show flexibility. The big one for me, I would say on top of that, is the check-in piece. And I think this sounds really kind of might not be applicable for all businesses, but for me, we used to have those old-fashioned water cooler conversations, or your manager would sit on your desk, can I talk to you about this for 2 minutes? And you would never really think too much about it. We all now have our diaries full of Teams meetings and client calls, all kind of addressed across your diary, and you have emails and you get your Teams notifications and your Zoom notifications. And one thing I personally don't see a lot of is the phone element does not go off very often, and when it does, you have a missed call in Teams. There's people that would often say to me, they're like, oh, why is that call going off? Why makes them anxious? What's wrong? Why am I getting called rather than a Teams or an email or on the meetings? And that's the bit which I think is misplaced, because that watercolor meter might have just been your boss sitting there with a smile on his face or her face talking to you about something in business, or just you yourself. But instead, if they do that over Teams, it's seen as strange. So I'm encouraging people to be a bit more open with that. Give your kind of teams a call. How was the Formula One? Did you go and watch Barbie or Oppenheimer? What did you do at the weekend? Get back to this kind of new style of engagement we have, and find your kind of new way of working with your teams, because those 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes a week could be the difference between their well-being being supported or not, because they feel as if it's not just this kind of transactional relationship.
The research shows how far opportunities are still determined by background and predicts a fall in income mobility for young people, driven particularly by the pandemic, especially those children who lost out on hours of school learning during lockdown, and more recently, the cost of living crisis. So on a personal level, I believe businesses should have an important role to play in boosting social mobility for the younger generations. Companies sort of have the power to remove these barriers against those from the less advantaged backgrounds, and make sure that everyone has access to the same opportunities. And I think in some of the answers, you kind of hinted and highlighted some of the ways in which they can do that. But aside from what you said before, are there other actionable insights that you think companies can incorporate to promote or drive social mobility in their organizations?
Yeah, it's really important for me personally. Got the chance to run my own global program and made it as inclusive as possible in terms of no kind of educational parameters, no skill set parameters. But for me as businesses, I think, look, we all know it's on the agenda. I think you've got to lead from the front. It's going to take time. Take time to look at your own business story, your value commitments, articulate kind of why you want to be driving these social improvements, and make them kind of practical and realistic in terms of the adjustments. It's not going to happen overnight. There's other challenges that are happening. I think that's where I think people try and look for the showstopper when the practical and the realistic is probably better. There's such an opportunity to kind of get out there. I think good example for me, I went and spoke to a few universities, probably last year, I think it was. Getting out and getting that face time with them was really important for me to actually see, because they are obviously hearing these stories about companies wanting to be better around social purpose, and they are a university maybe that has higher proportion of students from maybe low to medium socioeconomic backgrounds in terms of kind of finance, health, social resources, etc. And they were so disappointed in terms of they heard these companies kind of make these commitments, but they never saw them. They had similar, very local companies. They weren't seeing the big players or the more kind of heard about organizations coming from outside of their core units, which are not in those towns and cities. They were quite far advanced in terms of travel. And they had this no support, whether it was kind of face-to-face or virtual. And the virtual piece for me is an absolute no-brainer. It's an opportunity for us to extend on that. So I think we just need to ensure we're doing what we can to be leveling up. We're in a really kind of luxurious position here, being in the HR recruitment field. We have so much to offer these organizations, especially. We know what good looks like. We know that these people have skills coming out of education sometimes, and we know what it takes to get that job, and we have such a powerful position to be in a good way. And I think we as organizations can do more around that. In terms of the kind of logistics again of little things, I would say openly advertise outside of the normal routes where possible. I think that is more and more important nowadays. Ensure your organization, if it's super diverse and you're really pleased with what you're doing, like share that. Make sure your interviewing panel are fair and diverse. Same applies for your kind of websites and your social medias. Just make sure you're painting a really good picture on these channels, because sometimes, and too often, I would see it with young talent. They will look at a website or they'll look at an organization and they will sit down and say, do you know what? I'm not dressed like that, or I'm not as confident as that. They speak differently to me. I'm not as confident as that, etc., etc. So them self-opting out of processes is the biggest no-no in this whole situation. That's where it's all going wrong. And if something like that happens on something like a website or something, so something as kind of basic and so equally as consistent for all candidates, it shouldn't really be the case. Just thinking about my own processes, just try and give as many layers to the process as possible in terms of opportunities to interact and integrate with your candidates. Remember, it's not just about us selecting them, it's about us allowing them to select us. It's not always one way nowadays in recruitment, it's about both ways. And I've spoken about it before. I think the upskilling opportunities is quite a big one. I think if you look at a lot of stats out there in the market, and I don't have them to hand, but if you compare organizations' investment into postgraduates versus school leavers, there is a huge difference in terms of who gets offered the upskilling, which to me is again the wrong way around. It should be upskilling offered to people irrelevant of their kind of educational background. And then lastly, with all these requirements, just never forget, it's one thing to get this kind of high potential people into your business, but that needs to continue. I said before, it was all about front loading. Too often I would see it where we spend a lot of money on attraction, they come into your business and they are themselves, they need to feel welcome, to be their true self in that organization, and then they're more likely to kind of stay.